problem when there is two Jewish on the table. If I could change the name of or the title of the presentation, I would say that probably the first one is understanding the role of China, not in the decline, but in the reshaping of US manufacturing, or probably understanding the role of China in the decline of US primary manufacturing, which I think is a little bit accurate point. The first point that I want to comment is probably that China is reshaping the economy of the United States. US is changing from a manufacturing economy into a manufacturing economy. This is one of the differences I can say why. In terms of employment or in terms of time, US employed probably or lost in the last 10 or 15 years at least more than 7 million of jobs. And this phenomenon probably could say, we can say this loss of jobs is due to automatization or computer-aided processes. Another point I can say is probably that US is creating or decided to create emotional trends and assets to fulfill the Chinese aspirations. And this is another different strategy that US decide. Therefore, with this kind of decisions, US public policies, we can say that in those results, the higher productivity in US from 1919 to 2005 is a result of trade-off task through three primary channels probably. The first one is increased productivity of existing firms. The second is forced exit of less productivity firms, both in US and probably in China. And a battling of average effects, where more labor-intensive tasks perform overseas, thus US workers on average more productive, probably. Other results of the offshoring of US companies to China is the growth in profits for US manufacturing firms, which means less activity or less industrial activity, but more profits of US companies. The second one could be the increased wage inequality in US and lowering wages for unskilled labor and increasing for managers is what you say the hamburger CEOs probably, you know. So what we can say about, I can say in the last 10 years of US economy is that manufacturing employment dropped in US from 18 of workforce in 1990 to 11 in 2009, which means probably about 5 million lost of jobs. Services employment increases by 3%, about 25 million additional jobs. That's what I say is a reshaping and not a decreasing of the phenomenon. The increase of unemployment for US is about 3% of workforce, which means around 8 million jobs. This kind of facts means that in every month the salary for a US manufacturing worker is around 15 times the amount of a Chinese worker. So it's a term of value versus quantity. Meanwhile, these facts happened in US. We have another kind of critical situation in China. We have workers leaving agriculture in massive numbers. We are going to have around 400 million of people that they are in aggressive migration to urban areas, which means that the present manufacturing and services employment is going to grow up. The China manufacturing sector increased 3% of the economy between the same period, from 1990 to 2005. In terms of number of people, we can say this probably 25 million additional jobs. So if we can compare these facts between US and China, we can say that per 1% increase of the Chinese manufacturing employment from 1990 to 2005 is associated with 0.341 decrease of US manufacturing employment. And if we add four years in this period, which means from 1990 to 2009, is every 1% is 3.365 decrease of US manufacturing.
That's a concern. So why do we care? Most economists don't worry about these sorts of things in the sense of, we say there's a reallocation of our economy and people find new and better things to do. This is countries capitalizing on the comparative advantage. But I think there is a justifiable concern here. And I'm from Detroit, and my dad was a former employee at Ford, so I'm aware of some of these concerns. I think that there's recognition that not all jobs pay the same way. So here's this line which came out of people who were angry that Ford was making too much money, was Ford successors, UAW resentment, and labor talks, right? And this is, the average hourly worker at Ford made $109,000 in 2010, including wages, benefits, and overtime. Now, on the one hand, that's a great thing. I mean, it's a lot of my neighbors, people who were making really good money to do jobs that did not require higher education. And that was wonderful. On the other hand, the birth of this project was a reflection that instead of just looking at American data, which is what we usually do, we usually think about America, and then like there's this like massive ocean where everyone just falls off to Mars or something like that. We have these trade statistics. We actually look at the data in China and see what they can tell us, you know. So if in fact the decline in America is correlated with their increase in China, I will think of that as reflecting trade being potentially responsible for the decline in America rather than big technology. In other words, if I see people on planet Earth still doing those jobs, that makes me think trade is responsible rather than technology. The second thing I do is I stratify by occupations. So there's a lot of interesting economics about routine occupations, okay? So once upon a time you have elevator operators, right? Things that machines now can do seamlessly, right? So very rarely will we see elevator operators. And so what I want to know is how has the changing locus of employment, how is that related to the tax complexity of each of these occupations, okay? And indeed what we see is the Chinese are expanding on the routine occupations, and the Americans are doing more of the high-tech stuff, which is probably a good thing. And the third thing I notice is that U.S. worker-to-manager ratios rise, falling in China. What that means is America is becoming the mother brain to some extent for these industries. They design it in California, so it's like the old joke. There's no silicon in Silicon Valley, right? We don't bother to make computers in Silicon Valley. The thing that's worth doing in America is designing the thing. And so this is also reflected in the data of the manager-to-worker ratio. There's more managers in the U.S., and that's actually falling in China as they've moved over to routine occupations. What I find interesting about the trade literature is it's something that gets Americans really angry, lost the jobs, and the Mexican and the Chinese aren't so happy about it. I don't know how they feel in Mexico, but in China they're saying like we're doing the crappy job. What's so great about that? So I think there's some deep political issues. I don't say political, but political economy issues. Okay. So the second question is technical change. Did technical change limit U.S. manufacturing workers? Okay. So there's two schools of thought. One school of thought says, what are you complaining about? It wasn't trade, right? It was technology. Do you complain? The Luddite fallacy. They were so upset when the British didn't need someone to work the loom. But we don't cry for them because technology marches on. it's not a policy decision, but rather it's simply technology. Just like it killed the agricultural worker, so too is killing the manufacturing worker. So that's how to express the other side of the coin. I'm not going to take that with you. I'm actually showing you that offshoring and productivity, this surge happened at the same time, and it seems that in a very real way, the U.S. manufacturing workers were getting sent overseas, and it was the productivity boost is precisely the places where I see Chinese employment increasing. So it's very likely that it's at least in part related causally to employment in China. And then the last thing is declining labor costs. So this is not all a bad story. What we have is people in China doing these things for cheaper, which could be good for consumers, but bad for workers. So So what are the consequences? Well, the epilogue, I think that these slides have a much more like popularist Marxist bent than it's my personal belief. But at least up in this period, and I think we're about to get past this, what we see is rising corporate profits, increasing wage inequality, and higher unemployment. Okay, so something that's been an alarm of people who've looked at the, let's say, the stock market last year to Ed Bernanke, is look at this jobless recovery. The economy's coming back, and the jobs aren't. And that's fully consistent with this view that we are entering in a new era in which the capitalists, the capital, has more mobility than workers, and they've been migrating in a manner in which it's not good for workers globally. Okay, so we can debate that at the end. So let me give some background. And I think if I had done this with Mexican data, you'd see similar things. There has been a real movement of jobs across the border, and this is reflected in routine tasks. You see this mix of American managerial talent utilizing workers overseas, and that's also showing up in the productivity statistics. So you have to take those statistics with a grain of salt. The consequence, at least in the short run, seem to have been higher corporate profits and increasing wage inequality. But I think that even now I feel slightly different about this than even a year or two ago, where it seems like we're starting to move past that. But at least in the short and intermediate run, these are serious issues. Okay, so the road ahead, I think this is an ongoing project I've applied to the Census Bureau to try to get some of the microdata, because to really deal with this question rigorously, you've got to look at each company, what's going on there, and look at which firms have entered, which have exited, how we've seen this churn. I am open to any suggestions you guys might have. And I will conclude on a thank you slide to the Mexican friends and Sonia and my wonderful host. So thank you very much.